Chapter 11, Lien in Healthcare. This is a summary of the original chapter by Philip Jones and Barrett Thomas, who both practice at the University of Iowa. There are dozens of blogs, videos, articles, and books written on Lien in healthcare. This chapter is just a quick overview of Lien and certainly not designed as a full training course. The chapter was originally written in 2010 at the book's publication, and it is interesting how at that time considerable effort was put into showing how Lien is applicable to healthcare as well as a valuable tool. I think these conclusions now, almost a decade later, are easy to take at face value. It is, of course, difficult because Lien isn't done by a randomized control trial, but instead is demonstrated its effectiveness through case studies with compelling individual results. I trained at a hospital that was one of the early leaders in Lien methodology in healthcare and have firsthand seen the positive impact of this tool. I've also had the great opportunity to see an industrial setting that was using Lien at a very high level, and it was quite amazing to see how effective it can be done when done right. The chapter starts by recognizing the desire of organizations to provide high-quality healthcare at reduced costs. However, typically we think in order to do this, significant political will and major changes to the system are required. Unfortunately, this never happens. And so the authors propose a second way to provide high-quality care with reduced costs, which doesn't need political will or major system change. That is Lien. Prior to Lien's adoption in healthcare adopted a system which was derived from Frederick Taylor. This was introduced in the 1940s and was known as classical industrial engineering techniques. Although healthcare adopted this in the 1940s, these techniques were actually developed much earlier, as Frederick Taylor lived from 1856 to 1915. And he was really the founder of the concept of scientific management. He invented the time motion study, which is where you track an employee over time, and he was so specific in his requirements that he decided that 21.5 pounds was the optimal load for people to shovel, and he designed scoops which specifically met that criteria. His methodology is one where the management specifies with precision the correct way for something to be done, and then the never idle employee carries it out with maximal efficiency. The text identifies 4 of Taylor's philosophies. First, replace rule of thumb work methods with methods based on scientific study of the tasks. Second, scientifically select, train, and develop each employee rather than passively leaving them to train themselves. 3, provide detailed instructions and supervision of each worker in the performance of that worker's discrete task. 4, divide work nearly equally between managers and workers so that the manager applies scientific management principles to the planning of the work and the worker actually performs the task. We move now into Lien, and the origins of Lien come from Japanese manufacturing. It became known as the Toyota production system and was popularized in the 1940s. The system was originally developed by Taiichi Ohno, who lived from 1912 to 1990. The goal is to create an organization which continuously works to improve itself. It places the mandate not on just the management to improve the organization, but upon each individual worker to see how they can do their job better and to work with other employees in improving it. This is stark contrast from Taylorism described just before, where there's a specified correct way to do something and the workers ought to do it that way without thinking. The book identifies 14 principles of the Toyota production system, and these were initially listed by Leiker. And I quote, 1. Base your management decisions on a long-term philosophy, even at the expense of short-term financial goals. 2. Create a continuous process flow to bring problems to the surface. 3. Use pull systems to avoid overproduction. 4. Level out the workload. Work like a tortoise, not a hare. 5. Build a culture of stopping to fix problems to get quality right the first time. 6. Standardized tasks and processes are the foundation for continuous improvement and employee empowerment. 7. Use visual controls so no problems are hidden. 8. Use only reliable, thoroughly tested technology that serves your people and process. 9. Grow leaders who thoroughly understand the work, live the philosophy, and teach it to others. 10. Develop exceptional people and teams who follow the company's philosophy. 11. Respect your extended network of partners and suppliers by challenging them and helping them improve. 12. Go and see for yourself to thoroughly understand the situation. 13. Make decisions slowly by consensus, thoroughly considering all options, implement decisions rapidly. 14. Become a learning organization through relentless reflection and continuous improvement. These 14 principles summarize Lien, and it can be implemented using different tools. The book goes on to describe several Lien tools. The first is known as the 7 or 8 wastes, and waste is a core concept within Lien. It is essentially defined as anything that does not produce value for the customer, and waste should be identified and then eliminated. The text defines waste as either overproduction, waiting, unnecessary transport, excess inventory, motion of workers, defects, and unused employee creativity. Another tool is known as Tacit time analysis, and in here it tries to load balance the system so that the rate of customer demand matches the rate of production. The tool of 5 S's or 6 S's looks to help standardize the work for each employee using visual controls and employee engagement. This can be thought of as sorting, separating out unneeded items, straightening, creating a place for everything and putting everything in its place, shining, cleaning up the workplace, standardize, create standard rules, standard work, and standard procedure, sustain, maintain the improvements that were made, and focus on safety. The next tool is the 5 Whys. This is a process which encourages an organization to look at the root cause of why something happened. Often, the first explanation is not sufficient and actually a symptom of a deeper cause, and therefore asking why 5 times may help get back to the root cause. Failing to fix the root cause results in only fixing a symptom, and then the issue can arise again. The next tool is value stream mapping, which builds on the concept of process flow mapping, where you look at the steps to produce a product and you add on more details about the process occurring at each step. And last, Kaizen events, or rapid or continuous improvement events. These are common in Lean organizations, and the objective of a Kaizen event is to gather everyone together who is involved in a process, from workers all the way through management. And over the course of 2 to 5 days, a value stream map is created of the current state. Waste is identified. The root cause of the waste is then identified. Solutions are proposed, and everyone leaves having agreed together on a new process. Sometimes the question of how Lean versus Six Sigma differs is raised. Now, Six Sigma was initially developed by Motorola in the 1980s and popularized by General Electric. It is a methodology which focuses on reducing variance in production. If an organization, for instance, operates at 3 sigma, it will produce an output with 99.73% tolerance. However, because this output is a normal distribution, if production was shifted by 1.5 standard deviations, the total output would only be 93.3% within tolerance. And this is obviously problematic when producing at scale. And furthermore, if you have a final output which requires a summation of 5 processes, if each process is only operating at 93.3% tolerance, then the final summed yield is 70.7%. So the objective of Six Sigma is to try to operate so that only 2 parts per billion are outside of the design tolerance, which means that if the process then shifts by a standard deviation of 1.5, very few products will be outside of the variance. And if you think about this, Lien is different in that Lien focuses more on waste, on reduction, and organizational behavior, whereas Six Sigma focuses more on reducing production variance. Another major difference is that in order to become competent in Six Sigma, it requires reasonably intense mathematics, and therefore usually only a few people are trained in an organization to be able to perform Six Sigma, and they will certify often as a black belt. Lien, on the other hand, is easier to teach anyone in the organization, and it's actually encouraged to get as many people in the organization involved in Lien as possible. Now, why is Six Sigma important in healthcare? Well, the book shows some sobering numbers. If healthcare operates at 3 Sigma, that would result in 20,000 incorrect prescriptions annually and 15,000 dropped newborn babies in the United States. Furthermore, 12 babies would be given to the wrong parent per day when operating at 3 Sigma. Now, my own unofficial estimate suggests that I think parts of healthcare probably operate at closer to 2 Sigma, and so we have work to do. The book then goes on to look at how Lien is used in healthcare. It provides some short case studies, and I'll skip most of those for now, but you could easily do a Google search to find your own examples. It does identify some observations that came out of the work of Jones and Mitchell in looking at Lien in Great Britain's National Health Service. They identified that, quote, Lien must be locally led and not imposed from the outside. A lack of standardized work was a frequent and serious problem. Disconnects at the gaps between functional silos caused problems. Inappropriate metrics encouraged counterproductive behaviors, and complex processes with many handoffs caused problems. The book also adds some work from Intermountain Health where, quote, at the root of every operational problem we've studied is a poorly specified activity, a vague, unreliable connection, or a complex pathway. And another way to think about the problems that arise when Lien is looked at in healthcare is that issues can be grouped together typically as overuse causes, underuse causes, or misuse causes. One case study I would like to look at is one where they look at the problem of creating customer value and lack of communication. So this occurred in an infusion suite where the same nurse always worked with the same patient during each encounter because it was assumed that this was of value to the patient. But of course, it results in asymmetric resource allocation as some nurses are more idle and others have long queues. The reality is that when they polled patients, patients valued spending less time in the clinic above seeing the same nurse. And so the takeaway, you have to truly understand what is creating value for the patient. The second problem was a lack of communication. Often I think of this applying to lack of communication within teams, but the chapter points out that one of the issues in the clinic was that most patients came midday. And there was a lack of communication between patients knowing that there were available spots more often in the early morning or late afternoon. By communicating this to the patients, the work balance leveled out for that clinic. In another case study, just as an aside, they found that the rate of nurse interruptions while trying to transfer an order was approximately 1 per minute. And this resulted in an average order taking anywhere between 1 minute and over 13 hours to process, with an average of 7.5 hours. Queues and wait lines are a common part of healthcare. And one of the misperceptions the book points out is what the optimal utilization of a system is. Typically in healthcare, when we have an expensive component in a healthcare system, we think that we should use it 100% at capacity. However, the book suggested that in manufacturing, the optimal utilization is probably closer to 80%. And as it begins to exceed this number, an organization may try to look for increased capacity. And the reason for this, as we looked at before, is when you get closer to 100% utilization of a service, the potential for wait lines and queues grows not at a linear level, but actually quite excessively and exponentially. And I shudder to think at the hospital, which I worked at before, which was at baseline, always running at over 105% capacity. Finally, the chapter closes with some difficulties encountered while trying to implement Lien. They identify 6 major hurdles. The first, resistance to change. This is typical pretty much in any workplace when any major change is brought in. Now, of course, in healthcare, doctors are often the most resistant to change, and therefore starting with non-physicians is a good place. Narrow focus on tools is the concept that Lien is just one of many systems of organizational improvement. It doesn't have to be and shouldn't be actually used to solve every problem. There is no need to turn Lien into a cult. The third issue is impatience. The authors propose that it takes typically 2 to 3 years for the Lien projects to actually begin to improve higher level strategic goals. And in order for this to occur, Lien has to move from siloed parts of the organization to spread to the entire organization. 4, lack of humility. Sometimes an organization may lean out their entire operation and think there's nothing else to improve. Now, by definition, this means that they stop operating in a lean process where you think about continuously improving and eventually productivity drops off. 5, the lack of initial and ongoing senior management involvement can impede Lien's implementation. It's really important that senior management not only rubber stamp a Lien initiative, but get involved with themselves alongside of their workers in implementing and working on it. And lastly, sustaining Lien is difficult. Without continuous energy being focused into Lien and its operations in an organization, it will fade out and die. This was a longer chapter summary than anticipated, but Lien is such a core principle on how we approach many issues in healthcare organizational improvement that it was definitely worth focusing on.